Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the Glorious Revolution in England. So, if you remember the last time we talked about the English, we were really talking about the story of what happened with Elizabeth of England and the kind of relationship that existed between Elizabeth and Parliament. And this is going to be very different than the type of relationship that exists in France with an absolute monarchy, much like what you see with the rise of Louis XIV. So, we see a very different background, very different mentality, and more of a balancing act that has to exist in England than what exists in France. In Britain, we call this a parliamentary monarchy or a limited monarchy. The monarchy doesn't have full control over the government. And this is kind of the tradition the British have had since the Magna Carta. Whether or not Parliament was really playing a truly active role or not is a different story, but those two bodies have existed side by side now for over 500 years, and this is really just going to be a continuation of that evolving relationship between Parliament and the monarchy. But let's talk about Elizabeth herself for a moment. Last time we talked about Elizabeth, we talked about how life was good. This is the age of Shakespeare. Things are wonderful. She is balancing the whole situation between the Protestants and the Catholics, somewhat deftly, somewhat just by ignoring the situation in its entirety. But Elizabeth can't be around forever. Eventually, she will die, and when she does die, she will be remembered as one of the greatest monarchs in English history. But it doesn't mean that she was perfect. She is going to accumulate a ton of debt during the time that she is the Queen of England, whether it's from the conflicts that she's dealing with the Spanish and the Armadas, whether it's various other exploits into the New World, whatever it is, there's a lot there. But her personality and her personal charisma allows her to ignore those problems, ignore Parliament. She will rule kind of like an absolute monarch during her time period, and Parliament won't forget that. They're not a fan of it, and they're going to be asking more and more of each of the people that follow her in trying to maintain or at least reestablish that balance between Parliament and the monarchy. She never resolves the religious issues, and she has one really, really big problem that she never really addresses in her life, and that is the fact that there is no direct heir for the Tudor dynasty. She is the last of the Tudors. There are no Tudor children or other brothers and sisters the family line can continue to. So, when she dies, as she is guaranteed to do at some point in time, they need to find a new dynasty to run England. And what they will do is they will mourn Elizabeth for a little bit, and then they will move on to James. James is the son of Mary Queen of Scots, who, if you remember, is a cousin of Elizabeth, who Elizabeth had executed because she tried supposedly to plot against Elizabeth. Well, James has been living his entire life up to this point in Scotland, as he has been the King of Scotland. And because of that, he's at least familiar to English monarchy and English people, and they will welcome him as their king because it's not that far of a stretch, really. But the reality is that James is not Elizabeth. He doesn't have the same personal charisma that Elizabeth had. It doesn't mean that he's going to be a bad ruler, but it means that he's going to have to approach some of the situations in a different manner. So let's go back to those situations that Elizabeth had. Her country, now his country, is still very much divided by religion. The Calvinists in Scotland are different than the Anglicans in England, who are still different than the minority of Catholics that are still around, and then there's also the sect of Puritanism, which is an extreme form of Calvinism that they're trying to deal with as well. There's still a large national debt he's inheriting, and there's now a parliament who is increasingly embittered by the fact that throughout the reign of Elizabeth they were ignored, and they're really going to want James to come back to reapproach that idea that the monarchy and the parliament should be a shared source of power. So, James, how are you going to deal with all these situations? Well, he has a very not novel approach. He's going to approach ruling England as that it's his job to do it and no one else's. So he's going to rule by himself. He's going to try to create an absolute monarchy in England. He believes in the idea of divine right, that God has made him King of England, and therefore he has the right to rule however he sees fit. That being said, that's not exactly what English law says. So, he has got to find a way to deal with the fact that Parliament has one truly significant power in England, and that is the ability to tax. They are the ones who control the finances of England. They are the one who raise taxes. They're the ones who spend money. They're the ones who can create an army. All of that stuff is tied to what tradition calls the power of the purse, the power to control money in England. So James is going to have to think creatively if he's going to try to be an absolute ruler in England despite this. So what does he do? He develops something called impositions. They are taxes on imports and exports that he believes are his right to govern over because he has the right to deal with foreign nations. Because of his power to direct and deal with foreign nations, the amount of money that they get taxed upon coming into and leaving ports should be entirely up to him, and he should collect them without the approval of Parliament. And it's actually a rather clever deal, but Parliament's not going to forget this. He does find a way around Parliament. It's annoying to them, but they're becoming more and more embittered. So remember this, the issue with Parliament is just getting progressively worse. But James uses this newfound money and the newfound power that he has to really try to address some of the situations that exist in England. One of the first ones is going to be the religious issue. There's this growing minority of people in England called Puritans. They are an extreme form of Calvinism that believe that anything that's even remotely closely tied to the Catholic Church needs to be purged from the Church of England. So, they believe that the king should not become the head of the church. They believe there should be no head of church. There should be no hierarchical structure. There should be nothing that even remotely looks like a pope / bishops and cardinals and all that thing. Well, James, being from the Presbyterian Scotland, they think is going to be pretty receptive of this. And he's not, because the head of the church, the fact that he is the head of the Anglican Church, is one of the sources of English power for the monarchy. He's not just going to give up his right to have that control, that power. Remember, he believes he's a divine monarch, a monarch that has been given the ability to rule by God. So he's kind of just not going to approve of this. He's not going to buy into this whole idea of getting rid of the hierarchical structure of the Anglican Church. In fact, he's going to have a pretty elaborate response to the Puritans and their demands. 1, I'm not getting rid of that. 2, the Puritans also called for Sundays to be exclusively a day of prayer and reverence, that there should be no work and no play on that day. And his response to that is, very simply, 1, I'm not doing that because it would take all the fun out of life, and people get really upset when you don't have fun. 2, if I prevent people from playing sports or having fun or doing any sort of physical activity at all, then if we end up in war, we're going to suck at it because all of our people will be fat and lazy. So he really takes a hardline stance against the Puritans. Doesn't really affirm any of their ideas, and they're a little upset about this. They want him to get rid of recreation. He says Sunday is an official day of recreation in England. Screw you guys. They want him to get rid of the hierarchical structure of the Church of England. He says, not only are we going to keep it, but I am clearly the top of it. Here's the structure that exists. I'm putting all the people that I want into that structure, and if you don't like it, you can kind of just leave. And this is what happens. The Puritans are like, how dare you do this to us? We are leaving. And then they go to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and that begins that whole situation that you learn about the Pilgrims and everything in your middle school classes. So a little bit of the religious issue now has been handled. A lot of the Puritans are gone. Not all of them, but a lot of them are gone. So a little bit of that tension's gone. Well, what else does James do? Well, he's going to commission a new version of the Bible called the King James Version of the Bible, and it's going to become the Bible for Protestants around Europe. It is the most popular Bible even today when it comes to the number of copies created and sold. So that's good. That being said, he doesn't deal with the whole issue between Catholics and then the Presbyterians in Scotland. So while he addresses the Puritans a little bit, he doesn't really address the other aspects of that situation. In fact, some of the people in England think he's a little too lenient on Catholics, which, to be fair, his mother was Catholic. Not all that shocking that he might be a little lenient there. He also doesn't necessarily solve the situation between Parliament and the monarchy, but again, what are you going to do? The one thing that really does kind of, if you're going to do anything that tarnishes James's reputation, it's the fact that right before he dies, he decides to declare war on Spain because Parliament was actually wanting him to. This is a situation involving trade routes and colonial exploits and stuff like that. He does that to appease Parliament, but then almost immediately after that dies. And when he does die, his son, wow, that was hard for me to say, becomes the new monarch of England. And Charles is by no means anywhere near as effective as James was. He's going to inherit all the problems that James inherited, except now he has the war with Spain as well. And he doesn't have any of the political talents that his dad did. Whereas dad needed a solution, come up with a new way to raise money, and came with the whole idea of the impositions, Charles doesn't really have those kind of outside the box thinking moments where he's trying to come up with a clever solution to a problem. His plan is going to be the same way his dad was, try to just follow what his dad's ideas were. Hey, I need money, so I'm going to create, impositions or something. Well, this time, Parliament's a little bit more prepared. They know he can't just raise enough money via these impositions to fight his war with Spain, so they force him, if he wants to fight this war that his dad got him into, he's going to need to go to Parliament to ask for additional money and additional taxes. If that's going to happen, if they're going to give him these taxes, he's going to have to make a deal with Parliament. And this deal is what we call a petition of right. It's a legal document that lays out 4 specific rights of the people and limits on the monarchy. 1, a monarch cannot imprison people without just cause. This is the idea of habeas corpus. It's one of the most fundamental pieces of common law in England today, and really our law as well here. You cannot levy any sort of tax without Parliament's consent, and this would include impositions. It is now put into the umbrella of what a king can and cannot do. You cannot house soldiers in private homes. This is called quartering. That is going to be banned. It was a way for kings to, 1, watch the people to make sure they weren't plotting against them, and 2, lower their costs so that they can kind of get around the rule of Parliament. And then lastly, a king cannot impose martial law in peacetime. This was oftentimes used by British monarchs over the course of the last few hundred years because Parliament wouldn't meet in martial law. They would be forced to stay at home because there were things like curfews and things like that that prevented them from being an active member in the government. So Charles is forced to sign this, and he does sign it, except he has no intention of ever abiding by any of these ideas, so he tries to ignore it. And it was a great idea by Parliament, except it doesn't really work because there's no teeth to it. There's no real punishment to the situation. Now that he's got his money, now that he's got his army, Charles just doesn't pay attention to it. Well, the conflict with Spain continues on, eventually reaches a resolution, and Charles is now stuck with another situation. He has issues with the Scottish people that he has to address. And this is a problem. It's kind of a self-made issue. Charles was really trying to find a way to unify the country, streamline the government, and really make it a more well-oiled machine. He is going to cut down the expenditures of the government. He finally ends the wars with Spain. All these things are good ideas, trying to, again, improve how well the government runs. And in his mind, the only way at this point to improve that even more is to have a unified religion. One where all power is consolidated in the Church of England and at the head of the Church of England, which is himself. So he is going to go to the Scottish people and tell them that they need to convert to the Anglican faith. Well, this is clearly going to make them upset. And they're actually going to declare war on England. The Scots are going to raise an army and attempt to invade England in order to protect their faith. Well, the Puritans who are in England, those who didn't leave and go to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, are also upset because he's making all the Scottish people deal with this, the Calvinists do this, but he doesn't really say anything about the Catholics having to make any changes. So they think he's being too soft on Catholics and that it isn't fair, so now the Puritans are upset. And while Parliament's always been upset, they're upset that he's ignoring the Petition of Right, so now all these people are pissed off at Charles, and his response to this is going to be to invade Parliament. When he needs Parliament to raise him an army to fight the Scottish, they refuse to do so because they don't trust him. They already gave him an army once after he promised to do stuff, and even though he says he's promising to do other new things that they want, they don't believe him. And when they don't give him the army that he wants in the time frame that he wants it, he sends soldiers into the halls of Parliament to try to imprison them, hoping to disband Parliament, and then he has total control of the government himself. Well, Parliament doesn't disband, Parliament doesn't back down, and Charles is kind of stuck because now the entirety of London hates him. So he has to run away.
Run away! Run away!
And the English Civil War has begun. Charles has created a situation where conflict is inevitable at this point, and it will be drawn along the battle lines of who should be ruling England. On one side is the royalists, who are in favor of Charles still maintaining control in England and Parliament backing down. On the other side are the parliamentarians, shocking by their name, who are supported by Parliament and will actually be led by Puritans. So these two groups will battle it out. At first, Charles gains an early advantage in the war, but very quickly, the Puritans and the parliamentarians are going to start routing Charles's forces, and eventually Charles is captured by a guy named Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell is a Puritan general for the parliamentarians, and they will hold Charles on trial for crimes against the British government, for attempting to disband Parliament, for sending soldiers into Parliament, and he's publicly executed. And he'll be the first European monarch to ever be executed by his people. He won't be the last by any means, but he is the first. And when this happens, we have a situation. Who's going to become the next leader of England? And luckily they have a volunteer, and it's going to be Oliver. Oliver Cromwell will maintain control. And when he does so, he has this big old plan as to what the government of England should look like. And in doing so, he abolishes the monarchy. There will be no more kings and queens of England. He gets rid of the House of Lords, because it's too much of a hierarchical structure that's based on birth and not on merit. And the Anglican Church is tossed aside. England, for a short time, will adopt the Puritan faith. And it will become the first constitutional commonwealth ever. A group of loosely tied together territories, in which in this scenario is going to be Wales, England, Scotland, and Ireland, combined together or united together by a weak national government. Except Cromwell has zero intention of actually abiding by this whole weak national government thing. Instead, tricks them all and makes himself a military dictator. He will disband Parliament when they try to stop him from dominating European affairs or British affairs. And when the Scottish and Irish become frustrated with this Puritan rule, they will try to break away, and he will crush rebellions in both areas, resulting in the death of over 500,000 people. And to this day is still considered a horribly reviled person in both Scotland and Ireland. So, hundreds of thousands of people are dead in England, or I guess Scotland and Ireland. Everyone hates Oliver Cromwell. He institutes Puritan rules. There's no fun. There's nothing. It was just 5 years under Oliver that just sucked. Nobody liked it. And upon his death, his body will be exhumed and Oliver will be ripped to shreds. The people will party in the streets. They will have all the fun that they had pent up for 5 years in one massive celebration. And England is like, all right, screw Oliver. We need to go back to the way things were before. And we have a period that we now call the Restoration, where they'll go back to Charles. And Charles' son will return to England. He's been living in France during this time period, during the rule of Oliver Cromwell, and he becomes the new monarch in England. And upon coming back, he does force the British people to make a promise not to execute him like they did his father, and to allow him to do whatever he needs to do. And things are good. Charles is a good ruler. He's a good politician. People like him. In reality, though, they would have liked anyone who wasn't Oliver Cromwell at this point, so that's great. But the one problem he had is that he's in favor of religious toleration. He had lived in France for the last 5 years. He'd become friends with Catholics in France. He doesn't want to persecute them. He clearly is a fan of the Anglican hierarchy that allows him to have control. And he saw how the religious issues in Scotland and everything else really poisoned the country and led to war. So in his belief, we should just let everyone be whatever religion they want to be. Well, Parliament doesn't like this now. Parliament is going to go on a campaign that everyone should be of the Anglican faith, and this is going to annoy Charles. Parliament will pass a law called the Clarendon Code, saying that all non-Anglican are banned from religious and political life. That's going to piss off Charles, so he institutes his own doctrine called the Declaration of Indulgence, which is a law to override any law that discriminates based on religion. Well, now we have a confrontation. It's Charles II versus Parliament, and Charles doesn't want to back down, and Parliament doesn't want to back down, but unfortunately a situation occurs that's going to kind of force Charles's hand. Parliament is going to pass a law called the Test Act, which is kind of a religious test. You had to pass, or make a statement, pass a test saying that you would prefer or at least adhere to the rules of the monarchy over any foreign religious ruler. It's really trying to call out Catholics because of their allegiance to the Pope. And Charles is going to, strike this down again with this whole Declaration of Indulgence. But supposedly a plot to overthrow the monarchy by some Catholics is uncovered. And this papal plot is going to force Charles to back down on the whole issue of religious tolerance because he can't seem weak when it comes to any sort of challenge to his own authority. So Charles does back down, and the whole religious situation in England stays convoluted. Well, shortly after this, Charles will die, and when he dies, his brother James will become the new king of England. Except James isn't nearly as talented as Charles. He's actually kind of an arrogant tool, and the people of England don't really like him. He flaunts the fact that he is Catholic over the English people, tries to put a bunch of Catholic ministers in control of the government, and Parliament's just like, screw it, we're done with this crap. We're not dealing with these monarchs anymore who suck and are trying to change how the country works. So they will drive him out of England in something we call the Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution is going to drive James out. He will flee to France, and the British are going to look to whoever they can find to now become the new monarchs in England. And what they find is that William of Orange, who is a prince technically of German background but living in the Netherlands, is married to a woman named Mary, who has a loose tie to the British monarchy. So they will go to Mary and William, and they'll say, hey, do you want to come become the new monarchs of England, the new king and queen? And you don't really have to do anything. You just have to sit there, look pretty. All the work will be done by us. Parliament's going to take control of everything. We're going to rule the country. And they're like, all right, sounds great. So they will come back and they will sign the new English Constitution, which really takes away all the role and responsibility of the monarchy and it places all of it into the hands of Parliament. This will be a nice constitutional monarchy, limiting the control of any sort of king or queen and really placing the importance of the government into Parliament. They will also sign and agree a Bill of Rights, which really becomes the foundation of the Bill of Rights for the American colonies later on. And England is now under an entirely different system. Whereas we had a limited monarchy before where Parliament and the monarchy kind of shared authority, but it kind of swayed in the favor of the monarchy. Now it's almost exclusively in the hands of Parliament, and the King and Queen are really just a figurehead. The English Bill of Rights becomes this huge, monumentally important document in Western government. No ruler can dissolve Parliament at this point in time. From here on out, Parliament is the dominant power in England. You can't tax without Parliament. You can't interfere with freedom of speech. You cannot penalize people for complaining about things. These are the foundational pieces of our government today. And not only do they lay the basic rights that people have, it also lays the basic system that we have today, because they create something called the cabinet system, where Parliament will elect from Parliament a prime minister who will run the government, much like we elect a president. The only difference is instead of a direct election from the people, Parliament chooses. It would be like if the Senate decided who the next president would be, as opposed to the people themselves. But this person now is really who is actually in charge of England. This prime minister is going to be the dominant political force in English affairs. And one of the first examples of this is a guy by the name of Robert Walpole. Robert Walpole is going to be the prime minister of George I. George I is the child of Mary and William. And he will overthrow, or at least thwart, an attempted restoration by James's son. And he becomes just a really effective political leader, laying the establishment of the foundation of what it means to be prime minister in England. He is their version of a George Washington. What is the precedent of what a prime minister can and cannot do? Well, his goal is to maintain peace within Europe. His goal is to spread trade and improve the economy of England around the world, and to solve any religious conflicts or any sort of internal issue, whether it be between the Scottish, the Irish, the Welsh, whoever. Internal affairs, prime minister. External affairs, prime minister. This is how the system is designed. Really, this is how it works for us today, too. So this period goes from a time where Elizabeth really ignored Parliament and was almost running as an absolute ruler, even though law prevented that from really being the case, to creating the type of government that will become the modern model for most Western civilizations. And it comes back to that question, or at least that situation before, of the two different types of government. We have a constitutional monarchy now in England versus the absolute monarchy that you see with Louis in France. Which is going to be more effective and which is the better choice for countries? Thanks and have a great day.